The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rolling hills when Mark Jameson drove his truck down the long dirt road that led to his ranch. Dust curled up behind the tires, catching the last golden rays of light and making it look as though the truck trailed a shimmering cloud. For weeks, he had been away on business, handling affairs in different states, and all he wanted now was the quiet of his land, the comfort of watching his horses graze in the pasture, the feel of the porch swing creaking beneath him, and the peace that came from being home. To him, his ranch wasn't just property, it was his sanctuary, a place passed down through generations. But as he crested the final bend and the wooden archway with his family's name carved across it came into view, something seemed wrong. There were cars he didn't recognize parked just inside the entrance. White SUVs with decals that read, "HOA Enforcement," sat crookedly along the fence line. The gate, which he never left unlocked, was wide open. His jaw tightened. Mark had heard stories of overzealous homeowners associations sticking their noses into people's lives, but never had he thought he'd come back to his own property and see them stationed like a patrol. He slowed his truck, surveying the scene, and that's when he saw her, a woman in a sharp blazer, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose despite the fading light, standing with her arms folded as if she owned the very earth beneath her heels. Karen Summers, the name was practically whispered around the county. She had become infamous for her endless complaints, her habit of calling in enforcement officers for the smallest of perceived violations. If a lawn wasn't cut to her standards, if a mailbox looked a shade too faded, if someone dared to park a pickup truck in their own driveway, Karen was there with her phone, dialing authorities as if the community were her kingdom. And now she was here, on his land. Mark parked and stepped out, boots hitting the gravel with a heavy thud. "Evenin'," he called, voice calm but edged with suspicion. "Something I can help you folks with?" Karen turned, her lips curling into a smile that was more smug than polite. "Yes, actually, you're trespassing." The laugh that burst out of Mark was short, humorless. "Trespassing? On my own ranch? This land," Karen said, gesturing grandly as though she'd discovered it herself, "falls under the jurisdiction of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. And according to our records, you've been in violation for some time. Overgrown weeds near the fence line, unapproved fencing repairs, livestock not registered with the board. You've ignored multiple notices." Mark blinked at her, trying to process the audacity. "I've been away for weeks. I don't recall signing anything that puts my ranch under your little HOA." One of the uniformed HOA enforcement officers stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Jameson, failure to comply could result in fines, liens against the property, and, if necessary, removal." Mark's eyes narrowed. Removal. That word hung in the air like a threat. "And just who do you think you're removing?" he asked, his voice dropping low. Karen smirked, pulling her phone from her pocket. "Why don't we let the sheriff sort it out? I'll call the cops. Maybe they'll explain it better." Mark stood still as she dialed, listening to her exaggerated tone as she told the dispatcher that a hostile trespasser had returned to a property under HOA jurisdiction. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue, he just watched. Because behind his calm eyes, something else stirred, amusement. When she hung up, she turned back to him with that same triumphant expression. "You'll learn quickly," she said, "that you can't just do whatever you want. The HOA keeps order, and people like you, people who think the rules don't apply, need to be reminded." Mark let the silence stretch, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the distance filling the space. Finally, he spoke. "Karen, is it? Tell me something. Do you have the faintest idea who you're talking to?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Some rancher who thinks he's above the rules." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Not quite. I'm the man who oversees every homeowners association in the United States." Her eyes widened, just slightly, before narrowing in disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous. That's not possible." But it was. Mark Jameson wasn't just a rancher. He was the director of the National HOA Oversight Board, the federal-level entity that regulated, audited, and, in cases like this, disciplined local HOAs for abuse of power. He'd spent years in the trenches of community management law, rising through the ranks until he became the very man Karen and her army of clipboard carriers feared but never expected to meet face to face. His travels weren't random business trips, they were inspections, meetings, and hearings across the country. His ranch was his retreat, but his real work was ensuring that no HOA could overstep their authority. And here she was, standing on his land, calling the cops on him. He stepped closer, so close that Karen had to tilt her chin up to maintain her defiant posture. You just made a call that's going to change things for you. Not for me. The headlights of an approaching patrol car cut through the twilight. The sheriff's cruiser pulled into the driveway, dust swirling around it. Two deputies stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts as they looked between Mark and the gathering of HOA enforcers. What's going on here? One of them asked. Karen rushed forward, pointing a manicured finger at Mark. That man is trespassing on HOA-controlled property. He's been refusing compliance, threatening our officers. Mark raised a hand, calm and steady. Sheriff, I think we should have a quick conversation. Off to the side, the deputies exchanged a glance, then nodded. They knew Mark. Everyone in the county did. He was no troublemaker, no squatter. They'd seen him at town meetings, charity events, even offering to sponsor new equipment for the sheriff's office. He was respected, trusted. So they followed him a few steps away, out of earshot of Karen and her crew. Mark leaned in, his voice low. You boys might want to check the validity of this HOA's claim before entertaining anything she says. Because not only do I own this land outright, but I also happen to sit at the top of the very organization that governs HOAs nationwide. The deputies' eyes widened slightly, recognition dawning. One of them gave a short chuckle. Well, that's gonna be a problem for her. When they turned back, Karen was already mid-rant, listing every supposed violation. The sheriff's deputy held up his hand. Ma'am, we'll handle this. But first, we'll need to verify your HOA's jurisdiction. Karen faltered, her rehearsed confidence cracking. It's in the bylaws, she stammered. We expanded the community borders. That expansion was never approved. Mark cut in smoothly, his voice carrying authority. And even if it had been, you can't annex private ranch land into an HOA without explicit consent from the owner. Something tells me you know that. For the first time that evening, Karen looked uncertain. The deputies were taking notes, the enforcers shifted uncomfortably, and Mark stood tall, arms folded across his chest. The balance of power had shifted, and she knew it. And this was only the beginning. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the fields, washing the ranch in warmth and gold. The chaos of the night before almost felt like a bad dream, but Mark knew better. Karen Summers wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. She would be scheming, grasping for any lifeline to preserve her authority. Mark sat at his wooden desk inside the ranch house, the smell of strong black coffee drifting through the room. Papers were stacked neatly in front of him. Complaints, petitions, and reports about Willow Creek HOA that had been piling up for months. He had been aware of them, of course, but seeing Karen's antics firsthand had pushed him to act swiftly. Now, her file sat at the top of his list. He dialed a number, and within moments, a familiar voice answered. Oversight Division, Washington Office. This is Jameson. Put me through to compliance. There was a click, then another voice. Compliance here. Mark leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the fields outside the window. I'm opening a full audit into Willow Creek HOA. Effective immediately. I want financials, board minutes, complaint logs, and enforcement records pulled and secured. Priority red. There was a pause on the line. Understood, sir. Any specific directive? Start with the fines. Something tells me they've been milking homeowners dry. By noon, the machinery of federal oversight was already grinding forward. Investigators in suits arrived in town, discreet but unmistakable. They visited homeowners, collected testimonies, and pulled records from county offices. One by one, stories began to emerge. Elderly residents fined thousands for minor infractions, veterans harassed for flying flags, single mothers threatened with liens for playground equipment in their yards. The picture forming wasn't of a community organization maintaining standards, it was of a small dictatorship built on fear and greed. At the center of it all was Karen. 2 weeks later, a hearing was convened in the county courthouse. The room was packed with townspeople, homeowners who had lived under Karen's thumb for years, deputies who had grown weary of her constant calls, and board members who suddenly found themselves facing questions they couldn't answer. Mark sat at the front, his presence both calm and commanding. When Karen entered, She did so with her usual bravado, chin high, designer purse swinging from her arm, but the whispers that rippled through the crowd told a different story. Her power was evaporating, and everyone knew it. The hearing began with a stack of evidence laid bare for all to see. Financial reports showed outrageous, administrative fees, funneled into accounts that led back to Karen. Photos showed her selectively enforcing rules, targeting those she disliked while ignoring her allies. Witness after witness took the stand, their voices steady, recounting years of harassment. "She fined me $500 for a garden gnome," one elderly man said, his voice trembling with indignation. "Said it disrupted uniformity. That's half my monthly pension. She threatened to tow my car," another woman added, "because it was a pickup. Said pickups were unsightly. That truck is how I get to work." Every testimony was another nail in the coffin. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she stood, her voice shrill with desperation. "This is a witch hunt. I was protecting property values. Without me, the neighborhood would fall apart." Mark finally rose, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the room. His voice was calm, steady, but each word landed with weight. "Property values don't rise when families live in fear. Communities don't thrive when one person rules by intimidation. And HOA is meant to serve its members, not enslave them. And what you've built here, Ms. Summers, isn't an association, it's an empire of harassment." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Even some of Karen's former allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge overseeing the hearing tapped the gavel for silence. "The oversight board has presented overwhelming evidence of misconduct. Effective immediately, Willow Creek HOA is dissolved. All outstanding fines are void. And Ms. Summers, your actions will be referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges." Karen's face drained of color. "You can't do this to me. I built this community." "No," Mark said quietly, "you broke it. Now it can heal." The gavel struck again, final and decisive. The HOA was gone. The townspeople filed out, relief etched into their faces. Some stopped to shake Mark's hand, others to thank him with tears in their eyes. For the first time in years, they felt free. Free to plant flowers in their yards, free to park their trucks in their driveways, free to live without fear of Karen's next notice. Karen, meanwhile, was escorted out the back by deputies, her once commanding presence reduced to a pale, trembling figure. The woman who had once terrorized her neighbors now faced the very accountability she had so often avoided. Later that evening, back at his ranch, Mark sat on the porch swing with a glass of iced tea. The cicadas sang in the tall grass, and the horses grazed lazily in the fading light. He felt the familiar peace of home settle over him, but beneath it was a quiet satisfaction. He hadn't just protected his land, he had protected an entire community from a tyrant. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his office. "Audit complete." Several other HOAs flagged with similar patterns. "Recommend nationwide review." Mark smiled faintly. He knew what that meant. Karen wasn't an isolated case. She was a symptom of a larger problem. And while she was finished, others like her would emerge. But that didn't worry him. Because he was ready. He would be the wall they crashed against, the shield for ordinary people just trying to live their lives. And as long as he had the authority, no Karen anywhere in the country would get away with turning community rules into a weapon. The stars blinked awake above the ranch, stretching across the darkening sky. Mark leaned back, letting the swing creak gently, a man at peace but never complacent. The fight wasn't over, but tonight, he could rest knowing one battle had been won. And tomorrow, he'd be ready for the next.